All right, welcome everybody to Comic Book Radio. I'm your host, Peter Cimetti, and this is episode 144. Tonight, my guest is Comics Division. We're talking about course correcting the comic industry. This should be an interesting conversation. Is it possible? Does it even need course correction? Some would say yes, some would say no, some would say absolutely this cannot happen whatsoever. It is on a doomed path. Who knows? I don't. But it's going to be fun talking to Ian about this. So before we bring him on, I want to say hello to those of you in the chat. We got Sketchosaur Rex here. What's up, Sketchosaur? We got Spicer McLeroy here. How's it going, Spicer? Cole King in the chat as well. What's up, Cole? Brian Suddenly Old is here too. How's it going, Brian? Manny Cornejo is here too. What's up, Manny? Thank you for being here tonight. Shrek, hope you're doing well. Thank you for being here as well. Wave of Mutilation is here. Says 144 equals, what is that? I say 2/5 or 2/3? 2/5 of a circle. Sweet. We're almost there. Thank you, Wave of Mutilation, for that fact. Look at that. We learn fractions on this show. Mia Madro with author J.D. Gunter. What's up? Thank you for being here tonight. Kona Blend in the chat as well. What's up? Citizen Ronan's here too. How's it going, Citizen Ronan? All right. So before I bring on Ian, I want to let you guys know, it says this here, 2 days left. Get a $10 sketch card on kingcryptid.com. You can also go to alternacomics.com/kingcryptid. This special, it's a very special price, $5 off. You would get a King Cryptid character, and there's one of 30 some odd characters to choose from. I list them on the Alterna site. It's tough to list them on the Indiegogo site. They only give you so much room. But I'll do that for you. Quick sketch and free shipping worldwide. So you can go to either alternacomics.com/kingcryptid or kingcryptid.com. Also, the Behemoth resin 4-inch figure in both gray and glow-in-the-dark. 2 days left to pre-order that as well. We'll continue to produce the gray one, but the glow-in-the-dark will not be reproduced outside of the pre-order numbers. So once the 31st, which is the last day to do that, once that is up, if you didn't get your order in for the glow-in-the-dark, it's never being made again. So make sure to go to alternacomics.com/pre-order and get yours. Or you can do it all in one shot. Go to alternacomics.com/kingcryptid. All right, guys, thank you so much. Hey, look at that, Brian. Thank you. I appreciate that. All righty, so without further ado, let's bring on the man of the hour. Comics Division, Ian himself. What's up, Ian?
Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Man.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you tonight. But before we do that, let's give a brief summary to those out there that maybe don't know who you are, a little bit of who you are and what you do.
Oh God. Well, I started my YouTube channel critiquing comics because of how awful Marvel had gotten, back in 2017, and I had stopped talking about comics because, at least American comics, because for the most part, with a few exceptions, I think the industry is largely irrelevant now. I don't have my sub at my local comic shop anymore. Mainly it's all indie comics now that I, either collect or buy. And primarily I just talk about entertainment in general, and something noteworthy coming up about comics, I do talk about it, but no longer just talking about American comics, which is a shame. Absolute shame.
Yeah. I mean, even when I go to my local comic shop, I'm diving into the back issue bins. Mm-hmm. Take a quick glance at the new release wall, and I'm like, pass.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but I find a lot of great stuff in those back issue bins, so that's good for me. And they usually tend to be on the cheaper side, especially if I get lucky and there's a shop with like a 50-cent bin or a $1 bin.
Right.
Some treasure in those. But yeah, indie comics predominantly in terms of new stuff is where I'm at as well. So how'd you get started in just all of this in terms of getting into comics, and how'd that go for you?
Yeah, I'm kind of weird when it came to comics. Like, I was never big into superheroes, but when I was a kid, I loved G.I. Joe. And G.I. Joe was my first comic book growing up. And
Nice.
yeah, so that was like the one I collected. I had a, really good friend of mine, really into the X-Men. I was never really into it. Found some of like I wouldn't say the early manga stuff, but it was like some of the stuff that was being printed here in the U.S. Captain Harlock. Trying to remember. I don't even remember the label that was being published under. But yeah, it was like Harlock and some other stuff. Dark Horse. Read a lot of I can't speak. A lot of Dark Horse. Dark Horse in high school. Loved the Predator series. Alien versus Predator, Terminator series, great series if you're able to get a hold of those older issues. And Ghost Rider from Marvel. That's basically and Spider-Man and ultimately Venom. So those were like, as a teenager, that's what I was reading. Then Image Comics came around. Started reading Image. Loved Spawn. Had a lot of really good comics coming out of Image. Still do for the most part. And yeah, I collected off and on for a while, stopped, started getting back into it back in the 2000s, maybe late 90s, 2000s. And it was when Devil's Due was doing G.I. Joe. That kind of brought me back. And then just the economy was kind of awful. Had to stop collecting Spawn. And I started getting back into it. What year was New 52? Was that 2012? 2010?
It's around there.
Yeah,
it's definitely around there. Yeah, chat. If anybody knows the exact year, let us know. Yeah. But that sounds about right.
I got promoted at work, got a pay increase, heard about New 52. I was like, hey, jumping on point, right? No, it's also a jumping off point for people as well. So I started getting back into comics then, and right before All New, All Different is where I start kind of noticing kind of some weird things going on, especially with All New, All Different. And I was like, what's going on? And then that's where I discovered other people that were talking about this stuff. And specifically, your boy Zach was talking about it. Captain Cummings was talking about it. Found I Love Comics.
Well, and you're talking about the All New, All Different in terms of Marvel, right?
Marvel.
It wasn't a DC initiative, which is funny because there's been many iterations of the tagline All New, All Different for decades.
Okay. But yeah, because I think when I jumped on, it was Marvel Now was kind of their tagline.
Yeah.
And then, and admittedly, they were doing some stuff I found interesting. Like they had the X-Men from the past coming to the future. I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. Not being a huge X-Men fan, I thought it was kind of neat. But I found that kind of storyline overplaying its welcome. And it's like, and that's when we had Iceman, suddenly becoming gay and all this stuff. And it was just, completely awful. And, they started hiring people that had that identity. You had Cinegrace doing gay Iceman. You had Gabby Rivera doing America Chavez because she's, was it Puerto Rican and gay?
It was very typecast, tokenized, stereotypical stuff, which is where I saw a lot of the backlash at first. Was a lot of that, and still to this day, even that's the majority of the backlash is people being like, this is just really ham-fisted, bad, stereotyped, weird stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and it doesn't have to be, right? I mean,
no, you could tell amazing stories with these kinds of things. I wouldn't go in there like, I'm a comic creator, in case you didn't know.
Yes,
I wouldn't go in there.
I purchased from Alterna before, so.
Oh, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Nowhere nearly as enough as I probably should. I definitely should be supporting you because, I know that one of the things that we're going to talk about is what can save the industry. And in my opinion, what you're doing is what I think is right for the industry. You have
thank you.
$1, $2 comics. And that's the other thing too, is the pricing has gotten so expensive, and the art and the writing is just not worth it. So why would I spend $5 on a comic book?
Yeah.
When there's nothing appealing about it. And that's where I think a lot of people are currently when it comes to comics.
Well, they're getting higher and higher now.
Yeah, they are. It's really ridiculous.
But
And
I was going to say, in terms of just characterization and creating characters, I mean, I work on my series King Cryptid, and I have a whole ton of issues planned out and mapped out. We're funding 5 to 9 right now. I can't imagine, instead of creating a new character, new situation, new scenario to enter the fray, going in there and then just revamping an established character, especially a beloved character,
right.
which happens time and time again. Storytelling wise, that just seems like the dumbest thing you could possibly do. You'd want to get more lifeblood injected into the story, into the world, play off of other characters, that kind of a thing. And it's just, that to me is puzzling in and of itself. No matter what they're doing with it on the superficial level, it's so strange to me to do that and not just come up with new characters.
Well, the thing that's so weird about it is that there's a lot of things that are wrong with the comic book industry. And it's not just what they've been doing to the characters, right? You also have the very predatory practices of Marvel when it comes to variant covers and special covers. Because I would talk to the guy who worked in my comic shop quite a bit about this stuff. And we talk about the whole thing with in order to get these special covers, you have to order X number of Squirrel Girl to get it. Nobody's reading Squirrel Girl. And I mean, we would talk about how, like, the owner of Heroes and Fantasies, that's the shop I go to in San Antonio, and the owner basically has like a storage unit that's like filled with all these back issues of modern comics that just aren't selling, and they're the type of store that would go in and they would buy literally all 20 variant covers of the Iron Man #1 with Dan Slott. I remember that. I remember seeing all of them. It's like, that is too much. And that's not just predatory on the shops themselves, but the customers as well, the collectors. And it's like the guy that has to have all 20 covers, right? I mean, there was a point in time for me, I was spending, probably about $100 every week in comics. And that number just slowly dwindled down because of how awful things were. Not liking the stories, not liking the art. And that's one of the things that I found to be just criminal when it comes to comic books is awful comic book art. I don't understand how they're able to get away with it. And of course, it's they're potentially paying somebody overseas that are cheaper and maybe not as talented or whatnot. And it's just it's rough. But when you go and you take a look at like indie comics, people are very talented out there. Better writing, better characterization, better artwork, and oftentimes cheaper than what you're seeing from Marvel GC.
Yeah. I do want to say one thing, though. Most of the time when they're hiring overseas talent, it's cheaper, but it's usually better.
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, I've known several people who have hired overseas. And
I've seen a lot of artists that are based in the U.S. or Canada, and they're coming in, and they are working cheaper because it's just that's the nature of the industry and the business. But it's stuff that
the name of the book. Maybe you remember. It's the zombie one that was independently done. I don't know if you remember. I'm totally blanking on it.
There's a lot of zombie books. Are you talking about Walking Dead?
No, it wasn't Walking Dead. It was one of the guys I was kind of involved in the Comicsgate community way back when. It was the chick in the it was like the onesie outfit with the machine gun. I totally blanking on it, and I have a copy of it somewhere. That's fine. He hired somebody overseas. I think it was in the Philippines. Great artwork, fantastic art.
Yeah, and so a big problem with it is creating that bottleneck feeling and squeezing everything out of every level. So you got the creators getting the squeeze play, you get the retailer, you get the customer. It all trickles back down to the customer, which oftentimes is kind of seen as like the beast of burden of the industry by people within the industry.
They're not really wanted.
Yeah, it's the weirdest thing.
Yeah.
And not to rag on the retailer too, but time and again, you'll see publishers or creators or whoever talk about retailers as the lifeblood of the industry. Now, the lifeblood is the thing that keeps the body alive. That's the customer.
Yeah.
Customers stop showing up. Everyone else dies. The retailer can order all the books they want to order. If the customers aren't buying them, then that's bad.
Well, you take a look at someone like Ron Mars, right? And his whole thing is, I work for Marvel. Marvel is my customer. And it's like, you don't understand that, yeah, you were correct. You got your money, right? And it's the same thing with Marvel when they go to the retailers. They got their money. And ultimately, it's the retailers that are going to be left holding the bag. And these people don't care because they got paid already. And it's like, yeah, you're right, Ron. You're right. Marvel is your customer. But I'm the one who ultimately buys your book. If your book doesn't sell, it's going to get canceled. So it's like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't go out there pissing off people who are potential customers of your book. That's
taking
issue.
things for granted.
Mm-hmm.
That mindset of taking things for granted is it's pervasive just in a lot of things nowadays. But it's disturbing to me to see that in a position within the comics industry where people just go, people, they're going to buy whatever the crap we put out there. It's on the shelf. They're going to get, they have to, right? They're collecting a series. They don't want to miss an issue. They don't want to not get the variant cover. They don't want to, I mean, the gimmicks are, they're still here. But they're astounding. They'd make the 90s blush.
Yeah.
The 90s were rife with gimmicks. But at least they were kind of cool. You got a glow-in-the-dark cover. You got a holographic cover, a foil cover. Mm-hmm. A gatefold sort of thing. A poster in it. A trading card comes with it. Is all these different things that, especially at the time for the target audience, made them go, ooh, But now it's like, so there's 30 covers. And
well, the funny thing is, I mean, look at X-Men #1, where they had like 5 variant covers, but they unfolded and they made a giant mural.
And
I mean, that's something that's cool, right? I mean, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I back when X-Men came out in the 90s, I legit bought all the covers, right? Because of that. If it was just like, oh, it's just variant artwork, I don't do that. But I thought that was cool enough.
You could see the method to the madness.
Right. Now it's basically, and I'll bring up the Dan Slott Iron Man again, because literally it was like the same cover, but with a different Iron Man suit. And I want to say literally the same pose. And it's like, why? First off, why you as a retailer would do this? That doesn't make any sense. Why would you go buying all these variant covers? During that time period, I was going to Dallas quite a bit, and I went to this smaller comic shop, and he had the world's smallest new release rack. And I was talking to the guy, we were talking about it. He's like, hey, because I went in on Comic Book Wednesday, right? He's like, I don't have a very large new comic selection. I was like, okay, I get it. I know how bad it is. But he had a lot of back issues, and he basically carried what he thought would sell, which made sense. And he was like one of those guys that wasn't going to indulge the predatory practices of, Marvel and DC.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that's the guy that keeps these companies afloat, and you got to make them happy. And, he maybe had like, I don't know, 10, 15 new releases when normally there's maybe like 50.
Oh Lord. Yeah. I mean, well, there was a point when we were in distribution. We got out of distribution 3 years ago. We just sell direct now, but there was a point where it was like something like 550 new releases in a month across all the single issue comics that were available. And just space wise, in terms of not just a publisher, but the industry as well, in terms of what's getting put out there for product, to think that there's going to be a constant level of space within a retail store for that amount of product every month, 550 plus new issues, something's going to give. So it's not going to end well. That's not sustainable. That's not a good business practice to have that level of product. You had certain publishers doing a lot of, like you said, predatory practices, incentivization on covers where you had to order X amount of one poor selling series to inflate the sales numbers. So it created this kind of false collector's market that was being ramped up of like, well, look at all these different things that are out there. But then you go into the store, and what's weird to me is, as a publisher, I like seeing things on the shelf, but I hate seeing them on the shelf too, because that means no one's buying it.
It means no one's buying, yeah.
So there's a couple of copies, okay, all right. But if that store ordered like 100, big old stack, falling off the edge. If you walk into that store, I mean, that's a shameful. That's a shameful experience.
It is.
To be like, what that is? No, has anyone touched that? So even creating that kind of thing, it looks really strange to see that, and to inflate the numbers in that capacity, just to have some variant cover that's not even worth close to the amount of all the totality of what was required to order that variant cover. So I don't understand why some retailers get involved with that when they can't sell something like that. I have 2 local shops by me, one of them in particular, oh my lord, back room with never-ending dollar variants that I'm like, that took a lot of comics to order to get that. And then a lot of the new stuff as well, stacks and stacks, piles and piles and piles of it, just insanity. It's going to be a really weird time, I think, in the comics industry if we go 10-20 years from now to look back, and if we still have the industry in the same capacity that it's at, to see the level of books that are there. Because even the glut of 90s books that people go, oh, it's unsellable, it was crap, it was this, it was that, it's still pretty difficult to find a lot of them in most back issue bins.
It's kind of weird. The one thing, too, that I find very interesting about the industry is that you can't just be a comic book shop, right? You have to have all these other things. Like, Heroes and Fantasies, I would say like a third of their store, at least the old one, they moved. I haven't been to the new one yet. A third of the store was comics. Everything else was like, collectible toys, RPGs, cards. I mean, they really big into cards, wargaming, stuff like that. It's just insane that you just can't be a comic book shop because you will go out of business so fast. And so many businesses have gone out of business because of how poor the industry is. And there's a lot of things that are, kind of at odds with it. I mean, you have, it used to be like, comic book was like 25 cents, 35 cents, super cheap, entertainment. Now they're in competition with video games and streaming and television, all these other things. Kids aren't reading it. It's mainly adults buying comics, and you need to get kids involved to go and get into the hobby if you want to have that hobby continue. But the issue is they need to make good comics. That's one of the big problems. So it seems like it's a giant house of cards right now. And, there's the issues with distribution with Diamond during COVID when, they basically shut down and were massively screwed. And DC was like, well, we're pulling the plug. We're going to find somebody else for distribution. Yep. And slowly everyone's kind of moving away from Diamond now. Diamond's hosed.
Yeah, that's when we had left too. I think a month later, DC had left Diamond. And I always wondered about those the contracts, because obviously we're seeing a lot of different publishers that have left or are no longer exclusive with Diamond. And it was only a matter of time until the exclusivity on that contract or that contract itself ran up, and then those publishers were going to look elsewhere. The thing that I'm very confused about for a lot of these guys is that in the day and age of you can just set up a shop like how we do, we sell direct. Let's say Image Comics wanted to sell direct, and they still wanted to sell to retail and this and that, and whoever wanted to order them, they could do that. But all you need is a couple of people, and you could just handle all of these direct orders that come right to the publisher and keep 100% of it. I think we're going to get to a point where if that doesn't start happening and publishers don't start selling direct and utilizing technology in the way that it is beneficial for them in terms of a website, in terms of e-commerce, even the ability to crowdfund and use that as a pre-order system instead to get books made, which a lot of indie creators do, and even some of the mainstream guys that are doing indie projects are doing.
They realize it's actually profitable for them to do it rather than working for DC or Marvel.
If the publishers don't start kind of acknowledging that, because distribution doesn't seem to be acknowledging that, I feel like the retailers have to really watch out, because if they're going to expect to just put product on the shelf and just stuff that people would be aware of, it's a brand, it's a legacy, whatever there is that's associated with it, they want product that sells itself, not product that they have to introduce to customers or market their store in a different way and set it up, organize it so that it's easy to find product and people come in. For the retailers that don't do that, I think they're going to have a really difficult time, because it's kind of like a be careful what you wish for, because the more you stock product in your store that just sells itself, the more that eventually that publisher, that vendor is going to catch on and go, it does sell itself. So why are we surrendering 50 to 60 to 70% just to have it sit in the shelf when we can just put it online? So
well, yeah, I mean, things have definitely evolved since when I was buying comics, where you had to 7-Eleven, and they either had the issue or they didn't. There's times as a kid I was running all over town trying to find a specific issue of GI Joe, and eventually, the funny thing is about they did do direct. I mean that's how I actually got most of my GI Joe comics in the '80s. Is it would come in a brown paper wrapper, mailed to your house, and it's like. Never missed an issue. Yeah.
And they arrived in surprisingly better shape than they should have for the most part.
They did, actually. Believe it or not. Yeah, I mean, that's the funny thing about it. It's like, and then, the comic shops, start popping up. Obviously, originally they started as carrying back issues and then started carrying, newer issues. And yeah, man, it's kind of funny how it's like, you guys are already doing this. What happened?
Yeah, I think, and feel free to disagree or add something else to it, but I think a big thing that helped the retailers be so successful in the 80s and then eventually a part of the 90s, it was the two-pronged effort of the newsstand and the direct market. And you would see all this, you'd see comics everywhere. You couldn't go to a place without seeing a spinner rack or whatever. Right.
Yeah.
But then, like you said, if you wanted to track down some of those back issues, you had to find a comic shop.
Yes.
And that was the allure and the thing that got you to it. And then you go in and you're like, holy smokes, this is insane. Heaven on earth. So that was kind of like the 1-2 punch, and they worked well together. They worked in tandem so well. And then eventually that kind of thing got chucked to the wayside, and Diamond being the benign monopoly, their words, not mine, benign, the benevolent monopoly that they are, they come along, swallow up everybody else, and eventually it becomes this direct market system where there's no returns, and eventually newsstand it falls to the wayside. The thing that's interesting to me is because retailers, the direct market, the comic shops, they started popping up with people basically just bringing their collections, opening up a shop. It wasn't this system based on constant pre-ordering. And I think as soon as it turned into a system based on pre-ordering and shouldering that burden to the retailer, as opposed to the retailer being kind of like almost like a secondhand shop of pop culture, as soon as it really hit that, I think it was just the end was going to be inevitable, because it was going to be more and more difficult, and you were going to have publishers becoming more and more predatory, because it was like, what was the pushback? There was no returns. There was nothing really to worry about on that level. All you had to do was make sure that you got it and you made it look appealing to the retailer. No longer did you have to even worry about cover design, because it wasn't about selling it on the stand to the customer. Once the retailer got it, who cares, right? Their fault, their problem. So once that kind of hit, it really became this weird thing. And I think if retailers kind of go back to being this secondhand shop of pop culture, I think they'll find a way to thrive again. But what are your thoughts
agree
on that?
No, I completely agree, because a lot of ones that do survive are just doing that. They're selling back issues, not current issues, because obviously pricing has gotten really ridiculous. Somebody comes in, they want to offload their collection, they can go buy a bunch of books, on the cheap, restock their bins. But I think you're right. I think that the future of the comic book shop is not going to be about selling new issues, because there's a lot of things that are against it right now, and that's the fact that they're garbage. I mean, just look at DC, and the whole joke is, oh, look, they made another character gay. Who didn't see that coming? So I mean, and again, what you're doing.
Do they have one? And I mean, I don't know, because maybe you don't know either. But anyone in the chat, if you guys are reading current mainstream comics, do they have any book that's about like a straight character, and the whole point of the book is mostly revolving around their sexuality?
I believe that's called comic book porn. Adult comics.
Is there like a the
I have no
closest thing I could think of would be like the levels of like a Zap Brannigan or a Johnny Bravo,
Yeah.
where it's mostly just them hitting on chicks the whole time.
Yeah.
Not that it's just like it's also within the story, but the overall story is not that way. Like you would not describe Batman with his superficial characteristics first.
Right.
That wouldn't be
Yeah, it's ridiculous. But like I said, I think what you're doing is, is good by, you're developing your own stuff. You have your own comic book. You have a series of comics that you sell on Alternative's website. It sucks that you're not selling to shops anymore, but I get that because it's kind of pointless.
Yeah, the system really became just even on the indie level, and I still see it to this day. Tons of books on there where sales have gotten so bad they don't want to release publicly what the numbers are anymore.
Yeah.
It's very difficult now to track down exact numbers for issues that are selling, and it's such a strange system. When we were a part of it, the biggest reason we started having to sell direct is because it was just difficult dealing with distribution even.
Mm-hmm.
They dropped the ball on close to 15 to 16,000 reorders over a year and a half with us, just not getting them to us.
Really?
Just I'd see him auto cancel in this. It's the most depressing thing in the world, because at first when you see it, so they order about 10-12% more than what the orders come in. They order a little bit more just to kind of make sure they have enough, replace any damages right away or handle any immediate reorders. But a lot of the time, we'd see issues completely sell out the first day at retail, including the overstock, and then we'd see back orders coming in, reorders of the books. Sometimes they'd be like 300 to 500 reorders coming in, and I'd see them live in the system. They update the next day. And so I'm getting excited that we're going to get another nice big purchase order. We overprinted, so we have the stuff to fulfill and send it out. And then slowly but surely, that order would never come in. And if you were to send it in, and this happened to us once, and then I never did it again, they would fine you $150 and throw away the books and go, "Don't you do that again."
Oh my God, are you serious?
Yeah, only send stuff to us when we send you a purchase order. And I was like, oh, okay. So I'm thinking like I'm being proactive. Out the window went like 200 something issues and we got hit with a $150 fine, leveraged against our next purchase order.
They couldn't have just shipped it back to you? I mean,
or just use it. So orders were there. The back orders in the system were there. If anything, by the time they got the product, it was like, I think 50 or 60 more were required on, because they kept on getting orders through.
Oh my God.
So yeah, and after a month, the system auto cancels it. So I started getting in touch after this happened about, I think, 2 or 3 months in a row, of upwards of like 1,500 to I think 3,000 or so reorders we lost in 2 to 3 months. I'm seeing people go to eBay paying like $10 for a $1.50 issue. I'm looking around me and I'm like, we got hundreds of these, but they're not going out. We weren't selling direct at that point. Yeah, right? So instead of doing that, like a fool, instead I got in touch with the brand manager. And I'm seeing these orders piling up. Is there anything we could do about this? And they go, oh, okay. Well, we have it triggered, so it sets at a specific amount and this and that. I'm like, well, what's the trigger point? And they're like, well, it's 10 copies. I'm like, if you go right now, there's one with 310 orders on there. So something is going wrong. It's not 10 copies with an automated trigger for a purchase order. And they put together a purchase order with what they had. They sent it to me. And if I didn't keep on top of it every single time, we would have lost a bunch. Eventually, we had 12 brand managers in 12 years with Diamond. It was frustrating. Wow. Every year.
Jesus.
Here's your new brand manager. Either someone quit or someone got, So it was over and over again. You can never get in the rhythm of learning, anything, and vice versa. So we eventually got stuck with a brand manager once ours quit because she was pregnant and then quit. And then we got stuck with an interim brand manager for the last 2 years that we were there. And he was interim. Supposed to be interim for 3 months. He stayed that way with us the rest of the time. Really let us know how much he did not give a flying F about what we were doing, what we were selling, what we were going through. Didn't approve.
That's fantastic.
Didn't approve of any of those purchase orders when I requested them, and we lost thousands. So after the first year of dealing with all that nonsense, I started selling direct. We started doing that just on Etsy, and then eventually we went and did stuff on our own site, and we haven't looked back. And by the time the pandemic hit, we were selling more than what we were direct than we were selling through to Diamond.
Well, that's
so
good.
yeah, so it was really just, it was insane dealing with that system, dealing with the cogs of it. There were a couple good people that were there. Eventually they all left. So it made it really difficult. But the whole entire system, I'm like, man, if we're going through this, there must be a lot of other publishers going through this. That's a lot of money retailers are losing, because I wasn't going to start losing all that money on the sales that were piling up. But the retailers were all losing that money because these were orders that they were taking for customers, or that they were putting in because they were like, oh, this book, people are into it. Let me get more of these. And that just wasn't going to happen. So the whole system just works against every aspect of the system to actually make something that could thrive, not just barely survive.
Yeah.
It's strange. So without getting further down that aspect of it, what's interesting to me is comics were, like we talked about before, everywhere. So to you, what era of comic book history do you think was great, and why? Why was it so great? Why would it do so well? Why do you think it was awesome?
Oh man, for me, I definitely have to say the '90s, mainly because those are the comics I know the most. Part of my huge part of my life back then. What made it great is the fact that it seemed like comics were just doing really well, which turns out they actually weren't. The speculative market really kind of hurt the industry quite a bit and almost collapsed it. But you had a lot of really cool stuff out in the '90s. It's like you had that switch from newsprint to the glossy paper, which I both love and hate, mainly because I love it
sparingly
because it looks nice. I hate it because of what it's done to the cost of comic books, right? This is where I talk about where I think you're doing things right. You're printing on pulp paper. It used to be that you could go out, buy a comic book, read it, leave it for somewhere else for somebody to read, right? A lot of people still do that, but it's different when you're parting with maybe $1 or $2 for a comic book, rather than it's getting to the point where it's like almost $9 an issue.
In some cases, yeah.
In some cases, yeah.
Yeah.
When it got to the point where I could go out and buy an actual novel for the price of a comic book, it's like, okay, there is a huge issue. But yet, for me, like I said, just a lot of the stuff that we got in the '90s from Spawn and what was going on with the X-Men and Marvel, and you had a lot of good stuff during that time period. And obviously, there's the classic eras that started everything, but that's not really what got me into comics. I just love what was going on. They re-kicked off Ghost Rider, and I know that a lot of people aren't a fan of Danny Ketch, but I thought it was great. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, I loved the Danny Ketch '90s Ghost Rider too, and I also loved just Johnny Blaze.
Yeah,
good God, but I felt like the '90s really built, at least on the mainstream level, built off of a lot of the successes of what came before.
They did. Absolutely.
And then it leveraged a lot of the popularity of just the ancillary media. You get the '89 Batman movie, then it helped with all the toy sales and the merch sales and everything else. So it really was able to kind of greenlight this system that felt like it had some synergy to it. Batman the Animated Series, the X-Men Animated Series, Spider-Man. It goes on and on for that whole decade. And then into the early part of the 2000s with the Justice League series and things like that. So it felt like there was that synergy. I think that's exactly what anime even has going for it with manga right now too, and vice versa. Because there's a synergy there. There's something that feels like these things make sense together. These things have the same kind of individual in mind, the audience in mind, as opposed to so much of the ancillary media nowadays feels like it's trying to do everything to appeal to someone else. Almost like it's, let's forget that these are based on comics, because comics, I mean, they're geeky, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to be a geek or a dork or something,
Comics are for nerds.
Yeah, these are cool movies and stuff, right? This
Yeah.
is serious now.
Mm-hmm.
Serious stuff. Comics, right? You use your imagination and something like that. I mean, who does that? And there's a weird kind of connotation, a weird sort of chip on the shoulder about that, which is so stupid that the industry does that over and over again. Instead of having this confidence, having that swagger that they had for so long, where they're like, yeah, it's comics. We're making comic books. They're edgy. They're not. Yeah, sure, they're not for everyone. You know why? Because only the coolest people are getting into comics. Like, it felt like that for a little bit. Even though maybe you have a different experience on the playground or whatever it may be. It still didn't deter a lot of people. Instead, it made them be like, yeah, I still want to, get into my stuff. I still want to read comics. I still want to partake in all that.
The weird thing about it is, it used to be like one of the largest forms of entertainment for kids because, they had a comic book for everything, like in the 50s and 60s. And grant that after Wortham, that kind of changed. But yeah, it's just, there was, comics for girls, about dating and all this stuff, much in a weird sort of way. It was a lot like manga back then during that time period.
Exactly.
They had manga for everything. There was a comic book for everything.
Are you trying to say that they were diverse?
Yes, actually. I am trying to say that comic books were diverse and were up to a point. Now I wouldn't say as diverse as they were back in the 80s. That's the funny thing about it is how everyone pretends that comic books were never diverse. And it's like, what are you talking about, man? Just look at X-Men in the 80s, 70s, 60s. Well, maybe not the 60s, but a lot of stuff did start happening in the 60s where they introduced non-white characters and whatnot. But I just remember like looking back at my friends that were reading X-Men when I was in elementary school. And, you had this cover and it was a very diverse cast of characters. Nobody complained. Nobody cared. It's because they weren't doing anything stupid. And and they can still do that if they stop doing things that are stupid. And that's kind of the problem. They don't want to stop. And they're just burning their industry to the ground, which, according to Mark Waid, is perfectly fine by him because he doesn't want to work with no Nazis.
He doesn't want to work with whoever he wants to label as a pejorative.
Yeah.
And whoever that is determined solely by Mr. Mark Waid, apparently.
Yes.
Which is interesting.
It is, because it's like taking a can of gasoline, dumping it on your head, and lighting yourself on fire. It's like, okay, what purpose does that serve? Mark Miller actually wants to save the industry, God willing, right? And because he listened to a retailer that complained about, the writers injecting themselves into their comic books. Obviously the guy's an istophobe of some kind, right? And the fact that Mark Miller gave him some air, now Mark wants to burn the industry down.
Well, you can't express your displeasure about anything nowadays because it all leads back to that sort of reputation destroying kind of stuff. Yeah. It's not, don't listen to the argument that's being presented. Don't try to counter it. Just immediately go to the...
Shut up and consume.
Yes.
Yeah, don't criticize. Shut up and consume. Yeah.
And that's so bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
It's bizarre because, and I must have had the wrong notion of this. I know I do now. But as a kid, I always thought that creative people were more inclined to be free thinkers. More inclined... Exactly.
You would think, right?
So you would think.
Yeah, be more open-minded about it.
Yeah, more inclined to kind of march to the beat of their own drummer as opposed to the corporate drummer that says, no, you must follow the order that we give you, and that's that. So that's the thing that's interesting to me is because of the fact that a lot of this stuff is gigantic kind of corporatization of creativity, and that in and of itself gets a little bit weird along the way. So when you see a lot of the stuff that's going on nowadays in terms of the creativity, the stuff that truly is different, not the stuff that is actually homogenized more than ever before, with a thin veil of a superficial coating of look at all the different colors. Look at all the different colors. But then meanwhile, just right below the surface, it's all the same crap.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot of the stuff, and it sounds like you are too, that's truly different. It's truly trying to do something new and innovative and different and original and all that good stuff from the independents. And it's kind of always sort of been like that. But it feels like now more than ever, it's really it's such a stark contrast between the stuff that the corporate world will tell you, no, this is different and unique, and to what actually truly is different and unique, which is a lot of people going out there and trying to create their own stories and their own characters and do all the things that the reason, like what we talked about before, with certain characters being turned into certain things that they aren't, for the sake of pandering for sales to a specific audience, which
that doesn't buy their books.
Which is also, to me, isn't that kind of bigoted and prejudiced and racist, right? To assume that because of a certain type of person has a proclivity sexually in a certain way, or looks a certain way, or whatever, that they must be just like this character. This character is representative of them, and because of that, they will pay money to be like, that's just like me, like appeal to some strange sense of like sophilistic sort of stuff, almost bordering on a narcissism, to put it through and go, hey, this is you, you know. So wouldn't you want to buy this because it's you? Like that just seems so just reductive of human beings.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing I find so funny about it. Is the fact that it's like, I don't need to see myself in a character. I remember in the first issue of Spawn, I was reading it, I was like, oh, he's black, okay. Never thought about it since, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it was, to me, you know, the story and the character is what drew me in. I didn't care about his skin color. I really didn't. I mean, there's a lot of movies like back in the 80s and 90s. I mean, and that's the funny thing too, getting into movies and whatnot, we see the exact same thing going on. Very diverse time period, the 80s and 90s. And I feel that entertainment now isn't as diverse as it was then. But yet they want to claim that, this is the first. It's like, okay, whatever. I mean, Wesley Snipes, probably one of my favorite action stars from the 90s. I mean, Passenger 57, Demolition Man. He was great in those movies. And yeah, he was a hit. Same thing with Denzel. I mean, it's like we've always had this diversity in Hollywood, and suddenly now we don't. It's an issue.
Yeah, and for some reason, what I find is really strange, I was thinking about it today after talking to Nina Infinity was on the show yesterday. And I was thinking today, everyone always goes back to this strange time period of being like, so you want it to be like the 50s? And I'm like, I didn't live in the 50s. So
yeah.
No. But no. I mean, are people really trying to? And that's what's funny to me, is because that shows, okay, let's go back to a time period where things didn't superficially, at least, appear to be diverse. There was a lot of diversity among thought and among characters and among whatever, but maybe superficially it wasn't as diverse. But if we have to go back 70 or so years to find a time period that really wasn't that diverse, that means that we've had diversity for 70 or so years within these things.
That's a good point. Yeah. That's a very valid point.
It's like, no, how about we can go like the 80s or 90s? How about that? Or any other decade that's not the 50s? Because that's always the argument. It's always like, oh, you wanted to be like the 50s again. I'm not Stephen King. No, I don't want it to be like the 50s again, where every damn thing I write is in the 50s. Which is strange, because he really kind of touts that diversity line, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're a Stephen King fan or not, but I always thought that was odd. I'm like, why are you so? Every single story of yours is in the 50s, and if there's a black individual in it, they're magical. That's odd. But anyway, so when it comes to that, there's been a ton of diversity. I remember seeing the cover with Bishop. Remember Bishop? And he debuted in that X-Men issue, and I remember thinking, like, this dude looks like the friggin' most badass character I've ever seen. And I was a kid at that point in time, maybe 8 or 9. seeing that comic cover and seeing that character show up in the show and seeing the toys and seeing everything else in the cards. And I absolutely love that character. And now, I mean, man, they've done Bishop dirty over the years. So it's strange.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It really is. And I don't see it getting better anytime soon for the big two. I don't see things getting better for them at all. And sadly, the big two is the lifeblood of the comic book industry. I mean, they are the barometer of how healthy the industry is. And then it's funny how a lot of us have been screaming, hey, this is not good. The industry is burning down. Yeah, I was going to bring up Deathlock. I actually really like Deathlock as well. It's just like, now you have people like Gail Simone and freaking what's her name that wrote Bitch Planet coming out saying, oh, I'm concerned about the comic book industry.
Really? I'm
like,
out of the loop. Really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, Kelly Sue DeConnick. Well, the funny thing is, the same year that Kelly Sue DeConnick did the whole "if you don't like my politics, don't buy my book," literally like 8 months later, she was on a podcast talking about how the industry was getting massively screwed, and she's like, "Comic book shops are closing down. This is alarming." It's like, we've been talking about this for over a year. And you came out and said, if you don't like my politics, don't buy my book. And you're curious why the industry is not doing well. Now, obviously, she is not, the sole reason why the industry is doing poor. It's just another straw on the massive heap of problems with the industry. And then same thing with Gail Simone. Oh, comic book industry is fine. Comic book industry is fine. Here we are in 2023. I don't think the comic book industry is doing so well. Really? Welcome to the alt-right, Gail.
Yeah, that's kind of all it takes, right? Is to just be like, hey, I don't think that's going that great.
God, do you ever pay attention to Tom Brevoort at all?
I try not to, but sometimes I unfortunately do.
Well, here's an example which I find hilarious. So they announced this new X-Men thing happening, I guess, next year, or this coming year, I should say. And he makes this post, and on it, with the launch post, he's like, I don't want to see any istophobic comments. Yeah, I mean, it was more than that. And it's just like, really, dude? It's like, just promote the damn book.
See, this is where I think, and you mentioned it a little bit before, and I know this is the vernacular that gets tossed around about the speculators and the collector bubble burst and all that, right? Now, we've all, within comicdom, fans, retailers, creators, etc., we've all been, I think, trained to have this Pavlovian response to the 90s, the late 90s especially, equals that's when the collector bubble burst, right? And that is like this intrinsic training to not associate it, that no, it's called the publisher gimmick bubble burst.
Yes.
And people got wise to not buying cases of crap that was worth less than the paper it was printed on.
Yeah.
And instead of going, oh, that's on us, we screwed up. The publishers, the creators, the retailers, we all
blame
were doing
the customer.
It was like, instead it was blame the customer. And ever since that point, especially within the comics industry, it's always been the go-to of like, if something doesn't work out, blame the customer. You already expect the worst from the customer.
Yeah.
And it's it's difficult because every now and then I'll use even that, but I'm trying to change my methodology of talking about it and turning into the publisher gimmick bubble, because that it begins and ends with that. And they were feeling they were printing up their own money, obviously, at that point, so they could do no wrong. And then when people were just getting wise to it, that's when everything started crashing like crazy. But that methodology of thinking about blaming the customer for not being there, that they just stopped buying all of our awful crap one day.
They must hate
Shame
diversity.
on them. Yeah, exactly.
That's the excuse now.
Yeah,
you hate diversity.
Yeah, exactly. And then what's even stranger is that there's a ton of people who aren't that market that they love to hit on the head and say that, oh, look at the straight white male, right? Mm-hmm. What about when it's females? What about when it's someone who's not white? What about when it's someone who's not straight?
They get ignored.
Then they bring it up. I mean, I can't tell you how many times in 2018, especially when the industry, it feels like they came for me. Obviously,
Oh,
I think for various reasons. They didn't
yeah.
like what we were doing with newsprint, with the price point, with creator owned, with all of that. That they did not like that we were having success with that at that point in time. And in
Well,
some
suppose you're
respect,
a threat. To
unfortunately,
an extent,
yeah.
you're a threat.
And so in some, unfortunately, they won in certain ways because we're not
Mm.
part of the horrible ship Titanic of the comic industry. So like they won a little bit, we won a little bit. But I can't tell you how many people come across me, and at first I'm this big, bad, awful, horrible white guy, right? And they thought I was much older than I was because newsprint and all that, right? You know, I must be some 50, 60 something, whatever, blah, 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 you know, about nostalgia and this and that. And then it's like at the time I'm like 35. And then they go, oh, okay, well, so he's not like some old dude and he's not white. He's a race trader. You know how many people told me I was a race trader?
God.
I was like, wow.
Well, it's because they're flipping through that Rolodex of insults. First, it's you're an awful straight white male who's in his 50s. Oh, shit. He's in his 30s. You're just an awful straight white male. Oh, shit. He's not white. You're a race trader.
Yeah. I'm like, okay,
God.
wait. I told one person specifically.
I feel so bad for you because I know you've had a lot of bad shit happen to you because you just want to make comics.
Yeah, you
How
can't
awful.
do that anymore. You can't do that anymore. And yeah, I was cast off the sinking ship. So, you know, it was a bit of a Pyrrhic victory, though, because it wasn't like we left unscathed. But definitely in better shape than we would have been staying on there, that's for sure. But the thing that was so strange to me, and I told one person who was coming at me with that kind of insult, I was like, so I'm half Italian, I'm half Chinese. I'm like, so does that mean that the Italian half every day within me is always putting down the Chinese guy? Like, how's that working out? That must be what's going on. Oh, okay.
To me, the most insane thing is that you're just a guy who loves comics and you want to make them. And the fact that you got dragged kicking and screaming into this culture war, in my opinion, is ridiculous. And you have to pick a side.
I think most of us kind of do, which is insane. Right?
Yeah.
Most of us kind of get dragged kicking and screaming into it because most of us just want to enjoy the things we enjoy and not enjoy and have the right to not enjoy things we don't want to enjoy. And just kind of, it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
But it's like, unfortunately, and a lot of it, depending on what happens, you're not allowed.
You got to pick a side. That's the thing that's so ridiculous about it. And if you don't pick a side and remain neutral, they will assign you a side, which is, also equally ridiculous. And yeah.
Oh yeah. That absolutely got assigned to me at the time, especially, man, just for being like, look, I've known some of these people for years. These people are not the people you are trying to say that they are. People can like the things they want to like. That's fine. As long as they're not doing anybody harm, that's okay. If you don't like a certain, especially a fictional character in a story or whatever, it doesn't appeal to you. There's tons of stories that people love that don't really appeal much to me. And there's tons of stories people don't really love that appeal to me. I think everybody can kind of say that, whether it's movies, comics, books, music, whatever.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's called taste, your own individual taste. And God forbid you have something that differs from what the acceptable, taste is from the tastemakers.
That's
ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's what is so strange. So in terms of the course correction part, you touched upon it a little bit. And I mean, I can't believe that we're at the hour mark. This has been a very fast conversation. So for you had mentioned a little about the course correction that you don't, I'll let you put it in your own words. Do you think that there is a course correction that can take place within the mainstream comic industry?
I don't know, man, because it's like the rot runs deep. It's like with Disney and a lot of these companies. This is what happens when, first off, this is what happens when you hire activists and you don't hire people that are people person. There we go. And allow their employees to be on Twitter, because the whole thing is, if I have an argument and I represent a company, the last thing I'm going to do is go off on the person. And that's what happens, like with Tom Brevoort. We've seen it with Dan Slott, various other people that represent Marvel. And it's like, dude, it's like you can't say these things to customers. it will turn them off. And most places I know would be fired. So I think the first thing they need to do is implement a social media policy saying, don't fight with your customers. I don't care if you're saying that the customer is actually the retailer. Don't fight with the people who buy the comics. So that would be number one.
It is a weird kind of proxy relationship they like to have there. It's strange.
The other thing too is they need to stop hiring activists, or at the very least stop listening to them. And that's kind of the issue, like I said, is that when it's kind of all the way at the top and it runs all the way down to the janitor, what do you do at that point? I mean, the company's infested. It's going to just eventually burn itself to the ground. I don't know if they're saving DC or Marvel at this point. I really don't. I want to have hope and say, yeah, okay, maybe if they hit rock bottom with sales, they'll go, holy crap, we realize that we made a mistake. We need to correct course. I just don't see that happening. And part of it too is the fact that DC and Marvel are owned by much larger companies. Bingo. And I think first off, that props up their comics, right? So there's no incentive to writing a good story, creating a good product and selling it to people. They're being propped by their parent company. And I also think that these parent companies are farming them for IP. So I think it will get to the point where
like they didn't purchase Marvel or DC or whatever for the comic books.
No, they purchased for the IP.
Yeah.
So I think what will end up happening is that they will end up shuttering probably Marvel comics and just outsource them to another company, maybe IDW if they're still around. It's just I don't see it changing because first off, they're being protected to a certain degree with the larger by the larger company, and things might change with Disney because we know they're hurting. They've had a massive year of flops. The term flopbuster was coined this year as a result of that, and I think that ultimately money talks, and eventually they're going to run out of it, and maybe they'll keep getting their ESG money, and that will keep them going for a while. But eventually, that's going to come to an end. And it might be a year from now, it might be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. I don't know. But if they don't change course, and they don't stop listening to the activists, and they don't stop fighting with the customer, then nothing's going to change.
Yeah, I have to agree. And I know there's been a conversation the past maybe month or so about that, going back to Mark Miller with the Glenn at Comic Book Palace.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like there's so many aspects of the industry that even if they got one thing or two things corrected completely, which is that's like, wow, miracle in and of itself.
Yeah.
There's so many things. There's so many things within this industry at this point in time that have been just broken or discarded for so long that it would really take a massive sea change from top to bottom, and especially at top, because if you kind of change up certain things and you go, well, get all the good creators back, all right, pay them $1 million a page. Let's get ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
Give them $1 bazillion dollars.
That wouldn't change unless they change the top and they stop pushing certain things. It's like, just write stories, man. Write stories about people. I don't care if they're gay. I don't care if they're black. I don't care if they're XYZ. I just want an interesting story, and I don't want to be bashed over the head with the message.
Yeah, actually, the idea of. And that's the thing is that I think we're seeing, and this is across the board, it's not just relegated to comics. We're seeing a lot of manipulation of language. We're seeing a lot of things being inverted in their meanings. It's very Orwellian. War is peace, ignorance is strength, et cetera, that kind of thing.
Well, that's something I've been saying for a while is that, we have a lot more in common with 1984 and Brave New World than we care to imagine. And it's become a meme, especially in F&T when I bring up 1984 or somebody makes a joke about, oh, have you read 1984 lately? I bring that up because I see it in our current world, and that scares the crap out of me, and I don't want it to be like that. And part of it is that doublethink.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, those books were old, man. Those are old books. beautifully written books, but they're old. You're talking about 1984 in the 40s. You're talking about Brave New World. Holy smokes, that's even earlier.
Well,
And,
the thing that's funny
and
about it is that a lot of these
prophetic
people,
because
they
of what was going on.
understand human nature is the thing. And
Yeah.
a lot of it was, commentary on, authoritarianism, but it's like the founding of this country. I mean, the people that found this country were dumb. They understood human nature. That's the reason why they came up with the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, because they know that governments ultimately want more and more power. So yeah, it's the same thing with literature. I mean, it's funny. I don't know if you pay attention to tabletop RPGs or whatnot. There's several times this has made the rounds from Cyberpunk. It's the one about the whole thing with diversity and unity and stuff like that, and it came from the Tribes book. And it basically it's funny because if you read it now, it basically describes what is happening in the current year. But that book was written in '94, and a lot of people may not remember that you had a lot of things going on in the '90s, very similar to what we're seeing now. But back then, the left was pushing back against it, and now they wouldn't have embraced it, because I remember even SNL making jokes about consent. They're making jokes about "May I kiss you" and all the stuff, and it's the stuff is very much cyclical, and this time around it got embraced rather than being pushed away. So
yeah, and that's I try not to do the whole left right type of thing.
Yeah,
and I'm not saying that you shouldn't mention what you mentioned just then, but I find that there's establishment, and then there's anti-establishment, and there's establishment on both sides of the fence, and whatever
100%,
Yeah. And they all have the same inclination to do the same sorts of things. The thing that's so insidious about it, obviously, is the fact that, and this goes back for forever, human history.
We can go back to the '80s when it was being done by conservatives with Dungeons and Dragons and comics and movies and rock music.
Yeah. And I'm even talking way back, like hundreds, thousands of years. In terms of the way that you get people who infiltrate, Trojan horse it up, get in there, and rather innocuous at first, and they go along and they seem like, oh, they're part of us, they understand what we're about, and slowly but surely, they have their design set on more and more power.
Yep.
And more power leads to more and more corruption, and so on and so forth. And then all of a sudden, you go, well, the people who said that they were like that, they're behaving a lot like the people who we didn't want to be in these positions of power to begin with.
Yes.
And this happens all the time. So when people are so confused about it, and I don't understand how people can be that confused about it, seeing these kinds of systems of power played throughout. But I mean, then again, we also have a really big problem in modern day where we have access to tremendous amounts of information, and yet we're seemingly, anyway, at least on the superficial level, almost dumber than ever before. We're not looking into stuff past a certain level of what we're being told to, and trying to dive deeper. It's like we're become like a headline society. Then a lot of time you go and read the article and you're like, oh, there's not really anything that has to do with that headline. You know? So yeah, there's so many things at play that seem like that. And you had mentioned it before about the parent companies, and things that they're involved with. And that's kind of keeping this narrative going. And you could even have people that's the craziest part. You could even have people at the parent companies. You could have a whole changing of the guard. And it's like, if they're still going about the same system, those people will be acclimated eventually to that system too. So even if for a little bit it seems like, it's hopeful, it's going to be good. Not if they're still a part of that system. Got to get out of that system, set up a whole other system. And that leads me to my other question for you. What do you think is going right? Because there are a couple things. What do you think is going right in terms of not just comics, but also in entertainment, culture, storytelling, etc.?
I think that right now, I know that Razor Fist likes calling it the Iron Age, but I think that is what is going right. It's the independent people creating entertainment right now, be it comic books, YouTube, books, whatever. There are people out there that do want to tell a good story, and they're finding ways of doing it. Look at the Rippaverse. Look at the stuff Chuck Dixon has been doing with Conan, and I'm totally blanking. Grant Morrison as well doing stuff. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of old school people in entertainment, not just the comic book industry, that want to go and create stuff. I mean, to an extent, I mean, just look at what Tim Russ was trying to do with Star Trek, back, a couple of years ago before, he kind of got stomped out of doing Renegades. But he was a big fan. I mean, he was in Star Trek, but even after leaving Star Trek, continued his love of Star Trek. He created Gods and Monsters, which was a really good movie that he did. It was a short movie, but nonetheless. And that's where I think a lot of the future is from the ashes of everything being burnt down. Something will eventually grow from those ashes, and we'll get something new. It's like with comic books, TVs, and movies. I don't see them ever fully going away, but the industry may change. We may not have a mainstream comic book industry, but there will always be comics. There's always going to be people like you that have a passion for creating it. There's always going to be people like Eric July that have a passion for comics and want to create them. And it's the same thing with film and movies and TV shows.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff going on across the board. So many people are out there. They're just, and it's tough because right now, so many people are getting leveraged against legacy companies that have been around for decades, longer than most people have been alive that are into these things at this point in time. And then they go looking at your thing that's around for maybe 2 or 3 years or something, and they're like, "But is it Batman?" Like, well, give me 75 years. Give me 75 years and we'll talk, and then we can go, okay, yeah, if it didn't turn into Batman.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at did you see Godzilla -1?
No, but I've heard tremendously good things about it, and I've seen it looks good. I want to see it. Yeah, just finding the time.
It is a film that was made on less than $15 million, and
that's
probably
what I heard. Yeah, looks incredible.
Best films that came out this year. It is absolutely incredible, and it is a movie that has more heart than any American movie I've seen this year, and it came from Japan. It's phenomenal.
And there's a Godzilla movie that's isn't it from is it Legendary that puts those out?
Yeah,
an American. I think those are. I think that's why I avoided hearing anything about Godzilla -1. I think I had mistakenly thought it wasn't good.
Yeah, well, there's another one coming out next year. I think it's like Kong and Godzilla, something like that. And it just looks awful. It just looks absolutely awful. And the issue is that I feel like the art of storytelling has been lost to the spectacle, right? This, giant, massive CG spectacle. And it's a shame because it's like some of these movies, they don't even look great. They look awful. And, they're doing it for the set piece, but the story's garbage.
Yeah, there's something sinister there to read between the lines of all of that. The push, the constant push of the shallow, superficial mindset of just the surface level, and say that is the entirety of a being or of a story, of a character, of whatever. That really below the surface. What's below the surface? Everything you need to know is the surface. That to me is horrible, absolutely horrible. If anything, that was the beauty, right, of stories. The whole even the cliche, don't judge a book by its cover.
I was about to bring that up. Yeah. Well, it's true though. It's like, that's how we used to be as a society. Is like oh wow, that guy looks dangerous, and it turns out he's a really nice guy. And now it's like, oh yeah, that guy's white, he must be evil. Or he looks a certain way, or she looks a certain way, they must be a bad human. And it's like that's dumb. is absolutely dumb.
It really is, and it's sad to see that mindset pervade of like, there's one or two or three things about you on the surface level or whatever it may be, and that must be that you are in you're a good egg or a bad egg, and that's
Right.
it. It doesn't really matter about your whole entire existence as a human being dwindled down into relative
Arbitrary
nothingness.
traits. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, the fact that, I was in my 20s during the 90s, right? And I'm not saying we didn't have any issues back in the 90s. We did, for sure. But I felt like we had a lot more, racial unity back then. I felt like we were making strides, in this country and in the world to, I don't know, be excellent to each other. And now I feel like, that's quaint. Yeah, we're past those days now, aren't we?
Yeah. Well, there's another part to it too, and I think that this is something that becomes sort of seductive. I think, and feel free to correct me if you don't see this or whatever, you don't agree. I think there's something strange about it because like the way that this current generation of adults,
Right.
and I'll say anybody between, I mean, we should really say an adult is not just 30-year-old. But man, I know like 40-something-year-olds, and I'm like, I don't know. Are you an adult?
Are you an adult? Yeah.
So 30 to 50. People who mostly spent their childhood within the confines of the 80s or the 90s. And sorry for everybody out there. It's painful for me to even say that of like, yeah, I'm a childhood in the 80s and 90s. People that have that mindset, using it against those people who are trying to fight on that level of maintaining some semblance of what that used to be, that era, the attitude of that era even, and treating it as if it's not your fight. You're not supposed to have this fight. You're not supposed to feel this way. You're not supposed to say these things. The thing is, there's no friggin' cavalry coming for us.
No.
We are the adults, and the infantilization of such being overly just hit constantly again and again of like, no, you're not an adult yet. You're not an adult yet. And I see people refer to like 25-year-olds sometimes as a kid. What are you talking about? A kid? 25? It's crazy,
It is, but okay. You'll feel differently when you're pushing 50. Seriously, you will. But I mean, you're right. It's like legally, someone who's 18 is an adult, right? We know that for the most part, your brain's still forming. It's really not to your mid 50s, mid 20s before your brain stops developing, and things, kind of like level out. But I think the reality is once you hit your 30s is really where you kind of hit your stride as a human, biologically, because that's where, I'm not going to say you're middle-aged at that point, but it's the idea that you're still young. You're not your 20s, but you're still young and you've started to develop a modicum of wisdom. You understand how the world works.
Let's hope. Some perspective.
Like yeah, right. And that's the reason why I kind of look at people in their 20s. You're just a kid. And it's like, not saying it to be condescending or I think that they're an actual child, but they're still young. There's still that level of being naive. And it doesn't mean that obviously all people in their 20s are going to be like that. I think there definitely has been some very worldly people in their 20s because of circumstance, experience, whatnot. But I think a lot of it too is the fact that the way our society has progressed, it kind of indulges the infantilization, I think, of adults. I mean, if you take a look at the late 1800s, even early 1900s, I mean, you still had a lot of hardship during that time period, and you kind of had to grow up when you were younger and have that more worldly experiences, where now, because of how comfortable society has gotten, we can kind of indulge the adult infantilization a bit longer. And I think that's part of the reason why. and it's because of what's going on in culture too. We're not forcing young people to grow up. I think it's part of the issue. And there's nothing wrong with having a bunch of action figures behind you like I do, but you got to learn to pay your bills first, right? I mean, that's like, there's certain things you got to do as an adult, and it's that responsibility. You got to take care of that responsibility first before you can go out and play. And I think that the issue that we're seeing with these younger generations is that, oh, I don't want to grow up. I want to be a Toys R Us kid my entire life.
Yeah, and
why should I go to work and have a job and make money when the government can just give me money?
Or to lobby for that is like, wow, you're lobbying for the ultimate wet dream of any totalitarian authoritarian.
Control.
Forever dependent.
Yep.
Yes. That's I think you nailed it in terms of, it seems like the responsibility gets, and again, this is going to be a broad brush, and I do try to get away from broad brushing, but
I do
on
as
this
well.
scope, because there's always exceptions. But it seems like there is a constant push away towards accepting responsibility, towards living up to responsibilities, towards taking on responsibilities.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, this is the sad, horrible irony for everybody out there that is doing this and that is then wondering why they feel so helpless and hopeless and powerless. It's because responsibility ultimately gives you power.
Yes, it does.
And if the more and more you shirk away from responsibility, or you ignore it, or you don't want to take it on, the more you actually surrender your power to someone else, because someone's going to take that responsibility on. And if you're not going to own up to it and you're not going to take it on, someone else will. And it leaves you in a situation always being beholden to whoever it is does take that on and has that authority over you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's it right there.
So that's the thing. So it's strange to see that being, and it's such a short amount of time too, where we have the Sam Raimi Spider-Man film coming along, and obviously this quote is much older. much older in terms of great power comes great responsibility. And it wasn't Uncle Ben who said it. It's just that nice little caption at the end of that story about the lesson that Peter Parker learns. And that's a very old concept in and of itself. And to see in pop culture, in terms of just the films, going from that mindset about taking on responsibility and the importance of it, and that power that you have, and it feeds itself. The responsibility feeds into the power. The power feeds into the responsibility. To see that get pushed away more and more, the decline of that, and the suggestion that that's okay. Yeah. That is a frightening prospect.
Well, and it's part of the reason why I think Spider-Man was so popular is that he really did kind of represent the everyman. What happened if the everyman got superpowers, right? He's a guy saddled with a lot of responsibility. He has to make sure that Aunt May gets medication, and it gets the rent paid, and at the same time he's going out there and saving people. And it's part of the reason why I think a lot of people love that character so much, is that they can relate to him. And that's the big thing that we've been talking about with comics, right? It's not about the person's skin color or their sexuality or their sex. It's about their relatability.
Exactly. At the core, their human essence. What are they doing? What are they up against?
Yeah,
exactly. That's the stuff that resonates.
Yeah, and I think we're missing a lot of that too. It's like, I don't know if you saw Rebel Moon, but that's like one of the biggest issues I have with that movie, is the fact that it completely lacks the human condition. All the characters are sterile and bland, and there's nothing interesting about them. We don't really get to know them as characters, as people, as humans. They're just like, hi, I'm the cardboard cutout that is this character, and it's just like, whatever, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of proclamations as opposed to a lot of telling and not showing that goes on. And I haven't seen Rebel Moon, but I noticed that trend in a lot of storytelling nowadays, past 10 years or so. A lot of that, of just like someone shows up, like kind of just proclaiming how great they are, or others proclaiming it for them. Yes. And then you're just like, and when will you do any of these things that show us how great you are? And before that character would be set up to be called out by other characters. But now it's sort of like, oh yeah, they're great. And what do you mean? Well, they said they're great. I've heard that they're great. They must be great.
You see the series WandaVision?
No.
Yeah, it's there's a scene at the very end of the season, and it's like you basically find out that Wanda's the villain, right? And it's just like, and Monica Rambeau's like, they will never understand what you sacrifice. It's like she literally kept an entire town hostage. She forced children to stay in their rooms, and they're most likely dead. I mean, it's like she's the bad guy. Don't sympathize with the bad guy. Arrest her. And I had people go, so who's going to arrest her? She has all this power. It's like, bring in Doctor Strange, man. I don't care. It's like you're letting the villain walk away, and nobody's like going to stop her. It's like
it's justified.
Sending the wrong message. Yeah, it's justified. Yeah. It's exactly it. It's justified.
It's strange. It's very strange, man. Well, this was a great conversation, and seriously, I didn't think we were going to go for almost an hour and a half, but I'm glad we did. Thank you so much, man, for being on here today.
You're welcome. It was great. Thanks for having me.
And I'll have to have you back on again. People enjoyed the conversation, too, in the chat, and even, right here, Jetto saying, I think Pete and Comics should have a regular show. This is good stuff. But thank you, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was a blast talking to you. Really appreciate it, and you spending some time, a little bit over, too, than what I thought we were due. Before you go, where can they find you?
No clue. No, you can find me on YouTube and Twitter at Comics Division. You can find me every Friday and Friday Night Tights. I also do some tabletop with Geeks and Gamers Tabletop on Thursday. And of course, I stream on my channel every Monday and Thursday, and on Rumble as well on Wednesday.
All right, awesome. And for those of you that aren't subscribed, I've got the links to both. I actually don't have your Rumble. I've got your Odyssey and your YouTube linked up. So
yeah, it's
search for you on Rumble.
Yeah, search for me on Rumble. We mainly talk about politics on Wednesdays. So I got away from talking politics on YouTube just because YouTube doesn't like it, and trying to focus the channel just to be mainly talking about entertainment. So yeah, which
is unfortunate that they're so tied together nowadays.
Yeah, it really is unfortunate. But I mean, I have to say though, at the end of the day, as much as the beloved franchises we've known and loved for so many years have gone to hell, there is still good stuff out there. So I mean, there is hope. There is Godzilla -1. I have a whole list of good stuff, not just the bad. That I've been talking about. One Piece was a fantastic series on Netflix. Sisu was a great action flick that came out this year. If people haven't seen it, it's kind of funny that a lot of stuff that's good's coming from overseas.
Well, yeah, maybe it'll influence and inspire people who are here to kind of get something going and rise to the occasion. I think many independent creators, give them 5-10 years from now, look back and the ones that are still there in 5-10 years making stuff, I think it's going to be great. It's going to be great. There's such a learning curve. There's so many things that people are up against when they're just starting off doing this kind of a thing. And you don't know what the hell it's going to be like till you do it.
Yeah, we live in weird times,
all you want, but yeah, absolutely. But thank you guys in the chat for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it, everybody. If I don't see you tomorrow night, I will be back tomorrow night with Isaac Bell. We rescheduled for that. Then a Happy New Year to you. But I hope I see you guys here tomorrow night, 9 o'clock Eastern. Again, I'll be on with Isaac Bell. He was supposed to be on about, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and now we're going to have him back. Things worked out. So other than that, everybody, thank you guys so much for being here. Ian, thank you so much for your time and your conversation tonight as well. Really appreciate it. And anytime you want to come back, please feel free. And I'm sure that I'll get in touch with you.
Yeah, man, just ping me. I'll be here. That's fantastic.
Awesome. All right, everybody, have a wonderful night and an even better tomorrow. I'll see you guys soon. Take it easy, everybody.
Have a Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.